Let's do it. Did you know that there's never been a communist country? China's not communist, North Korea's not communist, and the USSR wasn't communist. The reason is that communism was a goal that these countries aspired to but never achieved. So what is communism, and for that matter, what is socialism? Well, first of all, it's easier to understand communism and socialism as reactions to failed and exploitative forms of government like a monarchy or dictatorship or late-stage capitalism. They're focused on providing solutions to end worker exploitation and the economic class structure that causes it. And that kind of exploitation is so common around the world that there's like 30 different forms of communism and socialism. Here's a list: Leninism, Stalinism, Trotskyism, Maoism, Dengism, Prachandapath, Hoxhaism, Titoism, Luxemburgism, De Leonism, anarcho-communism, and more. All of them stem from Marxism, as envisioned by Karl Marx, who is an economist and philosopher who wrote the Communist Manifesto. His big idea was that as Europe started to replace their monarchies with quasi-democratic capitalist economies, the people who got to own the farms and factories were no less exploitative than the kings and queens they replaced. Specifically, labor owners were collecting all the profits that their workers were creating, thereby forming two economic classes: owners called the bourgeoisie and workers called the proletariat. Marx's idea was simple: just have the proletariat collectively own the means of production and cut out the bourgeoisie, because what are they even doing anyway? And that's communism. Let's talk about socialism in part 2.
Good morning, good news! Gas prices are crashing throughout the United States as the cost of crude oil falls by just 10% in one day, dipping below $100 a barrel. But the reason for this downturn isn't good news at all. Over the past few weeks, fears of an upcoming recession have tanked the stock market and consumer confidence, with massive sell-offs in oil and gasoline futures, especially as market indicators point to a worse recession that'll hit us sooner than we expect. These fears are also leading to a rapid drop in housing prices, as nearly 15% of homes for sale are seeing those sales canceled by nervous buyers. And market analysts expect that these indicators combined create a snowball effect that only increases the risk and intensity of what is now expected to be a severe recession in the near future. The last time we saw this kind of massive spike and collapse in gas prices was during the Great Recession, which saw a high of $4.11 per gallon falling to $1.62 per gallon within just 5 months, along with nearly 3 million lost jobs.
Good morning, bad news. $7.25 an hour is an extinction wage. $15 an hour is a starvation wage, and $27 an hour is what you should be paid based on inflation, productivity gains, and the cost of living increases over the last 50 years. And the only reason you don't make $27 an hour is because the people who owe you that money spent it on propaganda and political lobbying to make you think that the extinction wages you're being offered are an acceptable alternative to the living wage you're actually owed. What's happening, everybody? My name is Christian Pierce for Good Morning Bad News, and let's talk about the fact that you've been gaslit by an economic system that profits off of your exploitation into believing that the minimum wage is even remotely close to what it's mathematically supposed to be. 50 years ago, the minimum wage was equivalent to $12.55 an hour, while the productivity was less than half of what it is today. That means that your baby boomer parents worked half as hard for twice as much money, and yet somehow millennials and Gen Z, which are statistically the best educated and hardest working generation in history, are the lazy entitled ones. See, originally minimum wage was established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt as a living wage to prevent the exploitation of workers and to eliminate poverty caused by wealth inequality.
Good morning, bad news. If you're a young person today, Gen Z or millennial, I'm sorry to say you've been shut out of economic opportunities that existed for many of us old geezers. No matter what influencers or financial gurus on TikTok tell you, no amount of hustling or gig work can replace a system that was once designed to help you prosper. Millennials are deeper in debt, half as likely to own a home, and more likely to live in poverty than their parents were, despite being more educated and working more hours. How and why did that system work for many of your parents and grandparents? And why doesn't it help you today?
This is the way to further growth and advancement. This is the way to greater opportunity and better living for all of us. This is the key to an ever stronger American economy.
I'm Robert Reich, here for Good Morning Bad News. And let's talk about how in your lifetime, healthcare, housing, and education expenses have soared while wage growth has stagnated. The federal minimum wage has fallen from being a living wage to a starvation wage. And if these weren't enough, 2 global recessions and a pandemic have likely stunted your
Minimum wage was set to make it mathematically impossible for the ultra-wealthy to hoard immense wealth while providing every single eligible worker with the means for a comfortable and dignified life. And guess what? It worked. Until 1979, as productivity increased, minimum wage increased. And the standard of living for the middle class was so good that you could go to college, buy a car, buy a house, raise a family, send those kids to college, and retire all while working for minimum wage. But then the 80s happened, and your lead-poisoned baby boomer parents elected Ronald Reagan's bitch ass, who introduced trickle-down theory, which basically says that taking money from the middle class and then giving it to the ultra wealthy is actually really good for the middle class. Turns out that was a fucking lie, and it bankrupted the middle class and killed the working class. If wages were held consistent to productivity, $27 an hour would be the minimum wage today, and that's what you deserve.
morning, bad news. Big banks are finally admitting that they're trying to destroy the working class for profit. A leaked memo from Bank of America shows that banks are pressuring employers to pay you less while wiping out available jobs to make it impossible for you to advocate for a living wage in the middle of record-breaking inflation and an ongoing recession, just so that they can keep making obscene profits through price gouging to create even more artificial inflation. The problem is, corporate profits have increased by over $700 billion a year since the start of the pandemic. The way a traditional economy is supposed to work is that higher profits lead to higher wages, more jobs, more consumer spending, and therefore even higher profits in what is called a virtuous economic cycle where everybody wins. But instead, corporations are dumping those profits into stock buybacks or spending them on political lobbying efforts so that they can pay less in taxes. And to offset the wage increases that would normally be paid for with profits, they're artificially raising prices instead. Over 50% of the recent price increases you're seeing in stores are the result of higher corporate profits, not inflation. The biggest irony is that this sociopathic demand for the ultra-wealthy to hoard even more wealth in the middle of an economic crisis is simultaneously bringing the economy to a standstill, wiping out the job market, skyrocketing inflation, and destroying the future of the working class for the sole purpose of preventing the average American from ever making more money because it might lower corporate profits back to pre-pandemic levels, which were already at record highs. Good morning, bad news. America is entering a Christo-fascist dark age, where a minority of religious extremists have successfully used an illegitimate presidency and the subversion of legislative procedure to create an ultra-conservative Supreme Court stacked with right-wing partisan judicial activists. Every single one of whom, by the way, was chosen by a private far-right legal group called the Federalist Society, whose sole purpose is to roll back a century of civil rights advancements in favor of establishing legal precedent that's almost entirely founded in Christian theology, and who are already calling for an end to federally protected access to birth control, same-sex marriage, and even interracial marriage while stripping voting rights predominantly from people of color. Simultaneously, the Supreme Court, along with state courts and legislatures around the country, are passing laws to give our hyper-militarized police more money and less accountability, like making it a crime to film police up close, or making it impossible to sue federal agents for violating your constitutional rights. And did you know that the Supreme Court has previously ruled that police have no duty to protect you? In other words, an illegitimate Supreme Court is passing religious rulings to be enforced by militarized law enforcement that has no obligation to help you and who are accountable only to themselves and are therefore rarely prosecuted for misconduct, brutality, or violating the few basic rights you have left. Good morning, good news. New federal guidelines state that total abortion bans cannot be legally enforced and violate the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act passed in 1986, which says that medical providers are legally required to perform abortions in an emergency that threatens the pregnant person's life, and this federal law preempts any state law, carrying with it up to $120,000 in fines. That's good news, right? So is the Biden administration finally doing something about the repeal of Roe v. Wade? Well, unfortunately, not really. These guidelines don't actually expand abortion access in any state because all states with total bans already provide an exception for threat to life. Actively enforcing violations of this law is a tiny step in the right direction. But the reality is that this is all entirely too little too late, and the administration has made it clear that they will not consider packing the Supreme Court or forcing uncooperative senators into carving out a filibuster exception to codify Roe v. Wade. So frankly, while Republicans are the greatest threat to our health and safety, instead of taking steps to stop them, the Biden administration is blaming on-the-ground abortion activists and protesters for being, quote, out of step with the mainstream of the Democratic Party. To which we say, we're out of step with the mainstream of the Democratic Party because they have spectacularly failed us. So please, for the love of God, do something or f*** off.
When billionaire bootlickers tell you that increasing the minimum wage would cause unemployment or kill small businesses, they lying. When you raise the minimum wage, the working class is able to spend that increase at small businesses so that their profits go up and then they can pay their workers more, instead of that money being hoarded by the ultra wealthy and spent on lobbying and stock buybacks while paying zero in taxes. Look, raising the minimum wage helps the economy and causes wages in all industries to go up. And the only people who actually lose money are the ones who have been hoarding the excess all along. This is Good Morning Bad News. My name is Christian Pierce. You can follow me on Instagram at Capstagram. I'm K-Town Cap on TikTok, and if you want to see all the scripts and sources for this episode that are 100% free, you can find Good Morning Bad News on Patreon, or if you just like the channel and want to support it, shoot them a follow on YouTube and Instagram. The links are all in the bio.
Good morning, bad news. It is now illegal in Arizona to record police misconduct or brutality if you're standing closer than 8 feet away. If an officer tells you to stop recording and you don't, they can arrest you and charge you with a misdemeanor for interfering with police business. Now, proponents of the law say that it does have exceptions to allow recording while being questioned by the police yourself, or if you're inside of a structure or vehicle where it's impossible to get farther than 8 feet away. But if an officer decides that the recording interferes with police business, whatever that may be, those exceptions disappear and you can even be charged with filming your own arrest. And as a bystander, there's nothing in the law to prevent a cop from walking up to you while you're legally recording, thereby making the recording illegal. Alongside this law, Governor Doug Ducey signed 2 more laws that require police oversight boards that are tasked with investigating police misconduct to be comprised almost entirely of other police officers from the same law enforcement agency, which defeats the entire purpose of independent oversight. In other words, Arizona is creating a blueprint to criminalize police accountability and to arrest innocent bystanders for the crime of recording public officials. And even if this blatantly unconstitutional law is challenged and makes its way to the Supreme Court, we already know that the ultra-conservative court is eager to strip accountability and oversight from law enforcement. Good morning, bad news. America is #1 in gun violence and mass shootings. Over the last 2 years, gun deaths have now become the #1 cause of death for children under 18, surpassing car accidents and drug overdoses. Not only did we just experience back-to-back-to-back mass shootings in Highland Park in Philadelphia, right after a school mass shooting in Uvalde, which was right after a subway mass shooting in Brooklyn, which was right after a gang mass shooting in Sacramento, but just this July 4th holiday weekend, nearly every single state in America reported shooting deaths. And in 2022 alone, there have already been over 300 mass shootings according to the Gun Violence Archive. No other high-income country in the world has this problem, with the majority of our Congress bought off by the gun lobby, while the Supreme Court ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol v. Bruen just made it easier to get a gun in states with stricter gun laws. Simultaneously, we're dealing with an unprecedented nationwide mental health crisis brought on by non-existent healthcare access and extreme alienation and radicalization brought on by economic hopelessness from a hyper-capitalist dystopia where everyone is overworked and underpaid with no future prospects like raising a family or buying a home, creating a recipe for an endless wave of violent despair with nearly unlimited access to weapons of mass destruction. There is a reason this is only happening in America, and nobody in power is doing anything to stop it. Good morning, bad news. Amazon will run out of workers by 2024 as employees burn out and quit so fast that the company expects to exhaust their entire available US labor force within 2 years. Actually, Amazon's massive turnover rate is intentional. It's cheaper to have massive turnover than it is to improve working conditions. And long-term workers are more likely to burn out, demand higher wages, and worst of all for Amazon, unionize. On average, 3% of Amazon's workforce quits or is fired every week. That's 150% annually. And as the second largest private employer in the United States, that's literally hundreds of thousands of employees. As it turns out, being a terrible employer with a serious injury rating that's twice that of other warehouse jobs while forcing employees to pee in bottles to avoid downtime and banning any discussion of abysmal working conditions on their in-house apps makes Amazon a last option for most job seekers, and they're close to completely running out of people desperate enough to be worked to the bone while their boss flies into space on a giant dick-shaped rocket.
Here are 5 executive actions that could change the future of America and the Democratic Party for the better without being blocked by Congress. Cancel student debt. Joe Biden could cancel 100% of federal student loan debt on the way to the bathroom in the morning, and it would be legal, constitutional, and binding. No matter what think tanks funded by banking conglomerates insist, the power for the executive branch to cancel or alter student loan debt terms is unambiguously established in the Higher Education Act. And that's not just a theory. Biden has already canceled portions of student loan debt that they signed up for as literal children. Then again, with politicians like Nancy Pelosi insisting that maybe not everyone would like that, catering to billionaire housing developers is still more important than saving the entire middle class from an apocalyptic future. Raise the minimum wage. It has been 15 years since any legislation has been passed raising the minimum wage, and King Joe Manchin has decreed that it won't pass in this Congress. But so what? There is simply no legal precedent preventing Joe Biden from passing an executive order raising the federal minimum wage. He already passed one specifically for federal employees, bumping them to $15 an hour. Although with inflation and increases in productivity, the actual minimum wage should be closer to $24 an hour. Companies have proven without a shadow of a doubt that they can afford a massive increase in wages, posting record-breaking profits over the last 2 years as the middle class collapses in America. The only thing stopping Joe Biden from saving them is Joe Biden. End the war on drugs through decriminalization. Richard Nixon started the war on drugs in 1971. Of course, we now know, as we did then, that it wasn't a war on drugs. It was a war on people of color and the poor, and led to the highest incarceration rates in the world on the basis of criminalizing nonviolent drug offenders who, at worst, are self-medicating for mental health and desperately need help, not punishment. Not to mention that this criminalization also leads to the mass execution of the mentally ill by police who have absolutely no idea how to handle people suffering from drug addiction and mental health crises. With just an executive order, Biden could pardon all nonviolent drug offenders, deschedule cannabis, and thereby eliminate strict sentencing and policing. Assault on the middle class by the ultra-wealthy. Ever since America fell for the absurd premise of trickle-down economics, that funneling every penny of wealth generated by the middle and working class to the billionaire class was somehow good for the economy, the American economic system has effectively collapsed, producing a highly efficient machine of exploitation. Reversing this trend is complicated, but has to start with closing loopholes created by Reagan, Bush, and Trump, particularly the 2017 Republican Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which cut taxes on the ultra-wealthy so much that now they pay a lower overall tax rate than the middle class. During the 1950s and 60s, in the period of the Great Prosperity, top marginal tax rates on the rich were over 90%. And we saw the greatest economic growth in history. Today, nearly all of that growth is focused on a small handful of individuals, as America's actual workforce is crushed under the weight of extreme inflation, low wages, and absolutely no possibility of home ownership or retirement. In all of these cases, Biden could massively change the course of American politics and economics to make the American middle class thrive and restore the US government to be by the people and for the people, rather than wholly owned and operated by the most exploitative and disgusting group of human beings we've ever seen in power. Thanks for watching Good Morning Bad News. I'm Johnny Derola, host of the Damage Report and the Peanut Butter Storytime Patreon community. If you want to see all of our scripts and sources for this episode 100% for free, or if you just like this channel and want to help support it and get this mug or these stickers as a thank you, you can find all of that on the Good Morning Bad News Patreon that's linked in the bio.
Good morning, bad news. The poverty line is fake. In 2022 in the United States, the poverty threshold for a single person under 65 was an annual income of $13,590, or $1,132 a month. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the United States is $1,697 a month. So a person on the poverty line can't afford a single month of rent. Not to mention food, healthcare, childcare, transportation, clothing, internet, a cell phone, or literally anything else. And of course you can say, well,
yeah, there are government programs designed to provide for those people below the poverty threshold.
The actual number of Americans who cannot afford basic needs, which is the actual definition of poverty, is 43% of households, or about 142 million Americans. So 100 million Americans, 1/3 of the entire country, cannot afford basic needs. And most don't have access to them through government programs because they don't fall below this fake poverty line. And the poverty line is fake because it was developed in the 1960s.
Morning, bad news. A few days ago, police in Minneapolis, Minnesota broke into an apartment with a no-knock warrant and within 9 seconds shot and killed Amir Locke, a 22-year-old black man who was asleep on the couch in the living room. This happened in the same city by the same police force that murdered George Floyd in 2020 and under the same hyper-militarized no-knock raid tactics that led to the murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. Amir Locke was not named in the warrant and had no criminal record, but police have justified the shooting by saying he was holding a firearm for which he had a permit and was legally allowed to carry, and which body cam footage shows was pointing at the floor. In short, another innocent black person has been killed by police in their sleep thanks to bad law enforcement policy, egregious mistakes, and a culture of irresponsibility that has led to the deaths of thousands of other black Americans at the hands of an overfunded and unaccountable police force. This weekend, protesters in Minneapolis marched in below freezing weather to voice their pain and frustration at the paramilitary organization that has invaded their city and caused untold damage to their communities, the Minneapolis Police Department. In response, the mayor's office has put a moratorium on police conducting no-knock raids, which have been outright banned in several states. The fact is, no-knock raids are one of the worst, highest risk, and lowest reward tools that police departments use as a means of terrorizing the communities they are ostensibly tasked to protect.
Good morning. Good news. Did you know that you only have to work 15 hours a week for a full-time salary? Companies in the US and the UK are trying out a 4-day, 32-hour work week to combat pandemic burnout, and a similar proposal is making its way through the California legislature. That's a good start, but on average, Americans work 47 hours a week, and if they're salaried, they may be working as much as 60 hours a week or more for the same amount of money. But if you work full-time, then you already know that nobody actually works 40 hours a week. How much of that time is spent checking social media, reading the news, talking to your coworkers, making coffee, eating snacks, taking micro breaks, texting, and looking for a new job on so-called company time? And if you're not working that whole time, but still generating 40 hours of productive output, why does your job still own you for 30% of the day, 70% of the week? In fact, a study out of the UK found that the average office worker is only productive 2 hours and 53 minutes out of an 8-hour workday, and yet overall worker productivity is at an all-time high. Of course, not everyone works in an office, and if you're a teacher or a healthcare worker putting in 40 to 60 productive hours a week, then your productivity is being severely devalued by someone working 15 productive hours a week, but billing for 40. If we actually pegged productivity to income, you'd be making 3 to 4 times as much as you do right now, and that's what you deserve.
Today, the bottom 50% of Americans, about 165 million people, hold $3 trillion in net worth, while just 745 billionaires hold $5 trillion in net worth. And the economic health of the bottom 50% has almost no impact on billionaires, as clearly evidenced by the absurd stock market gains we've seen this year. The entire reason the stock market went up during an otherwise economic crash is because the billionaire class knew that money was coming. Because when the market crashed 15 years ago and industries were deemed too big to fail and bailed out, it served as a guarantee going forward that billionaires and their companies would be protected by taxpayer dollars and debt. That change severed the connection between the real economy and the stock market. It doesn't matter anymore what the poverty rate or unemployment rate really are, because if it gets too hot for people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they can count on a wild spending spree by central banks to keep them afloat. Instead of helping the working class rebuild the economy from the bottom up in the aftermath of a cataclysmic once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, the world's economic power brokers realized that they could just funnel trillions of dollars to themselves, keep the stock market afloat, and ignore everyone else. And the hugely negative impact that this new decapitalist system has on the real economy doesn't matter to the ultra-wealthy. On an individual level, rampant inflation has absolutely no bearing on the quality of life of a multimillionaire or billionaire who doesn't care how much a gallon of gas or a loaf of bread costs, while being absolutely devastating and life-altering to a person living paycheck to paycheck whose purchasing power is shriveling down to nothing. It used to be the case that under capitalism, it was in a business owner's best interest to make sure their exploited workers were able to generate capital for them to steal through wage theft. But now that capital comes almost entirely from debt-generated investments and bailouts in an inflated and unsustainable economic system that's based on just printing money. And when that very obvious house of cards collapses, the ones at the top won't fall down with the rest of us. They've got helicopters and golden parachutes to save them. They'll be fine, and we'll be Thanks for watching Good Morning Bad News. If you want to see all of our scripts and sources for this episode 100% for free, or if you just like this channel and want to help support us and get this mug or these stickers as a thank you, you can find us on Patreon. The link's in the bio.
Good morning. Bad news. Being homeless is a choice. Not their choice, of course, but the people who have the power, money, and resources to end homelessness today are choosing not to. The fact is, we don't know how many homeless people there are in the United States. And it's not because it's too difficult or too expensive to find out. It's not. We just don't care. Ending homelessness is simple and surprisingly cheap. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, it can be totally eradicated for $20 billion annually. That's a fifth on what we spend on our pets every year. So why the wait? Even before COVID, homelessness was a crisis out of control. There are about 10,000 unhoused families in New York City and about 20,000 vacant apartments and condos in Manhattan alone. Just last month, when unhoused people in New York and DC were the targets of a killing spree, it was discovered that as much as 10% of the city's 25,000 apartments specifically designated for homeless housing were still sitting vacant. And this was because the process of matching people to housing is still done manually and on paper. But somehow the city will still find time to invest billions of dollars for tax breaks for luxury housing that will eventually be bought up by foreign investors that will also sit there empty and vacant, adding more and more ghost towers to billionaires' row. 45% of people without a home suffer from a mental illness, and without resources and treatment, this can lead to self-medication through drug use. But politicians have decided that it's much easier and cheaper to just criminalize homelessness rather than treat mental illness by making it illegal to panhandle or loiter, effectively shifting their status from being sick and in need of help to being a criminal and needing punishment. And if you think that this is just an East Coast thing, think again. Even supposedly progressive cities like San Francisco install anti-homeless spikes on public benches and other outdoor locations that make it actively hostile for unhoused people who are seeking shelter. Los Angeles has created zones all over the city that criminalize sleeping on the street without providing a stable alternative shelter for the unhoused population. And as the LA mayoral race heats up, the biggest debate topic is, how are we going to get the unhoused off of the streets? With even the most liberal of candidates campaigning for encampment bans and even more policing. And by and large, the police responsible for handling this crisis are not even remotely trained to handle mental illness or addiction, which is why in San Francisco, for example, most people who are killed by police are also mentally ill. Do they deserve to die because they were suffering with a medical condition? Or did they die because we as a society have just made peace with the idea that instead of spending less than 1/10 of 1% of our GDP to end homelessness forever, we figured it was cheaper and easier to ignore it and allow the cops to kill the ones who needed our help the most?
Good morning, good news! You should quit your shitty job today, or at least start looking for a new one. Right now is historically the best time ever to find a new job that will pay you more money with better benefits and working conditions. Last year, a record number of Americans voluntarily quit their jobs. 47.4 million people. That's 1 in 4 working age adults. And in doing so, the power balance in the labor market has shifted dramatically back towards workers, which hasn't really been the case since Ronald Reagan crushed labor rights in the 1980s. Thanks to the Great Resignation, companies have been desperate to find employees as their workers abandon ship for bigger and better opportunities, which has directly led to increased wages among lower and middle income jobs. The rhetoric we saw at the start of the Great Resignation about there being some kind of labor shortage has been proven completely false. In reality, there is a wage shortage, and as inflation causes prices to skyrocket while wages stagnate and business owners pocket the difference, there is literally no incentive to stay in a job that isn't paying you enough or isn't making you happy. Good morning, bad news! Capitalism is dead. Now to many of you that might sound like good news until you find out that it's been replaced by a much worse, more exploitative, and aggressively unsustainable economic system that we can best describe as decapitated capitalism or decapitalism. The simplest way to describe what is happening is that the health of the economy is no longer tied to the economic health of its population, which we can all clearly see happening today as the stock market skyrockets in value and billionaires double their net worth while most of the country struggles to afford even basic necessities. Decapitalism is best described in an example by Greek economist Yanis Varoufakis. In August of 2020, the United States was experiencing a blatant economic and societal collapse by every possible metric. Much of the country wasn't working, unemployment figures were impossibly high, consumer spending was in the toilet, and the GDP was tanking, while the US was undergoing the largest protest movement and labor crisis in history. In previous decades, when all signs pointed to a market crash, the market crashed. But in this case, it didn't. Instead, the S&P 500 hit a record high. Billionaires made $1 trillion while the rest of the country went bankrupt. And under traditional capitalism, that's impossible. Under traditional capitalism, that's impossible. There's no way to build that much capital if your workforce is unemployed, unproductive, and dying at an alarming rate. Without workers and consumers, where is the money coming from? And the answer is out of thin air. The money that flooded global markets during the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't really exist in the way that it ever has before. In response to the very obvious and prolonged market crash that should have happened during the pandemic, the Federal Reserve in the United States and central banks in other countries quickly printed trillions of dollars to pump into the stock market, which went directly to stock market shareholders and business owners in the form of inflated stock prices. Approximately 80% 50% of all US dollars in existence have been printed in the last 2 years, skyrocketing the money supply from $4 trillion in January of 2020 to $20 trillion in October of 2021. And nearly all of it went directly into the pockets of the ultra-wealthy while devaluing the comparatively small amount of money held by the middle and working class. Today, the bottom 50% of Americans, about 165 million people, hold $3 trillion in net worth, while just 745 billionaires hold $5 trillion in net worth. Good morning, bad news. Starbucks is allegedly engaging in illegal threats, intimidation, and surveillance of its workers in an effort to stop them from unionizing. This is according to a labor board complaint claiming that Starbucks is violating federal law as its non-unionized workforce makes efforts to finally form a union. Currently, no Starbucks locations in the US are unionized, but 6 stores in Buffalo, New York just won a key victory, allowing them to hold unionization votes store by store, which will almost certainly lead to the first Starbucks unions by the end of the year. This is terrifying to Starbucks, which has been at the forefront of lobbying against unionization for all private workers, not just their own employees. So does that mean your coffees are about to cost $15? Of course not. Starbucks is a valuable example of a company increasingly marginalizing its workers as it grows and becomes more profitable. Their last CEO, Howard Schultz, came out against the Employee Free Choice Act in 2009, which would have made it easier for workers to form unions. Alongside centrist Democrats, Schultz proposed a new plan that would actually make it substantially harder. And when it came to a vote, these Democrats voted against it, the bill didn't pass, and union membership nationwide continued to fall, setting back workers' rights during the global economic crisis and one of the biggest wealth transfers in history from the working class to billionaires, allowing for a continued generational stripping of workers' rights for the next decade and setting the stage for millennials to enter the workforce severely underpaid and without union protection. Today, Starbucks workers who are speaking out in favor of unionization are reporting that they're being pulled into one-on-one anti-union meetings. Stores are being arbitrarily shut down, temporarily closed, and unnecessarily remodeled. And despite only giving management their phone numbers for emergencies, workers are receiving unsolicited anti-unionization text messages. Executives are even flooding into union-interested stores in what organizers believe are classic intimidation techniques, with workers reporting feeling surveilled and disrupted from their work. One store in which 80% of workers signed union authorization cards was suddenly shut down and turned into a training center, and its workers were separated and sent to different locations. And still, corporate has been unwilling to address issues like short staffing, poor training, and inadequate safety measures. As the largest coffee company in the world, 10 times larger than its closest competitor, Starbucks is on track to force its employees into striking. Throughout the United States, Striketober has turned into No Work November, with over 100,000 workers striking or threatening to strike, while simultaneously, low-wage workers are abandoning jobs exactly like those offered by Starbucks and creating a labor shortage in response to a wage shortage and poor working conditions. These actions by Starbucks are completely inappropriate, as is their political advocacy against unionization for all U.S. workers. They are directly responsible for worker exploitation, both as employers and as lobbyists. Without significant change, they may have more trouble than ever finding workers, and maybe even, pending a pro-union boycott, finding customers. Thanks for watching Good Morning Bad News. If you like this channel and want to help support us and get this mug or these stickers as a thank you, or if you want to see all of our scripts and sources 100% for free, check us out on Patreon, the link's in the bio. Good morning, bad news. Elon Musk owes $15 billion in taxes, but apparently doesn't have any money, so he's being forced to sell 10% of his shares in Tesla. He even made a Twitter poll claiming he was wrongly accused of tax avoidance, leaving the decision to his followers as to whether or not he should sell his stocks. Since also, apparently he doesn't get paid a salary or receive any bonuses from anywhere. Oh my god, poor Elon. But there's just one problem. It's all bullshit. Elon Musk is sitting on 22.9 million stock options that he has to exercise within the next year or they become worth nothing. This Twitter poll about having no money is theater for fanboys who apparently can't see the difference between altruism and increasing your wealth by another $30 billion. And this trick that he's pulling about not having any money is literally designed to avoid paying taxes. Between 2014 and 2018, Elon Musk paid a marginal tax rate of 3.25% with a net worth today of over $300 billion. By comparison, the median American net worth is about $120,000 with an almost 30% tax rate. That means that you and I are worth 2.5 million times less than Elon Musk, but pay 10 times his tax rate. And the way he gets away with it is extremely simple. You and I are worth 2.5 million times less than Elon Musk, but pay 10 times his tax rate. And the way he gets away with it is extremely simple. By leveraging the stock options that he's not paying taxes on, he's able to take out loans against his company to pay for his lifestyle and any business projects. And you don't pay taxes on a loan. In fact, he gets a tax break on the interest from that loan. If you actually pay any attention to Elon Musk's tax avoidance, he's one of the worst offenders among billionaires, and proves the fact that the people who should owe the most end up paying the least. Between 2015 and 2017, already a multi-billionaire, he paid less than $70,000 in taxes and $0 in taxes in 2018. But apparently, that was still too high, because last year he moved his official residence from California to Texas, which doesn't have a state income tax. And that's kind of the perfect metaphor for how Musk built his fortune. While doing everything possible to avoid paying even a tenth of what he owes to the government, nearly all of his wealth can be attributed to deliberate benefits from the government he's refusing to pay back. His companies were jump-started with $5 billion in government subsidies, without which they would have never gotten off the ground. And California, which Musk has abandoned, raised the total rebate on buying a Tesla to $10,000. In fact, Tesla was only able to join the S&P 500 not because it sold enough cars, but because it was able to sell environmental credits in California to other automakers. Elon Musk is not a charitable or good person. We did a video about him and other billionaires being able to help save 42 million people from starvation, and his response was demanding that the World Food Program release its budget numbers, claiming that they weren't being transparent, with legions of his followers screaming that most of the money raised by the WFP goes into paying its fat cat executives. Except, the WFP already releases a detailed budget breakdown every single year. They're legally required to as the largest humanitarian organization in the world. And as it turns out, they spend exactly 4.6% on administration and 82.7% on actually feeding people. There are almost no charities in existence with a better breakdown, much less the largest one in the world. They're doing amazing work and have a well-documented record of transparency. But to Elon Musk and his relentless, inconvincible fanboys, it absolutely doesn't matter. Neither he nor they have any interest in helping save millions of lives or improving anyone's standard of living besides Elon Musk's. And that should be deeply embarrassing to them. But of course, it's not. Fanboying the richest man in the world because he spends his free time terminally online, sharing bad memes to defend his wealth, pretty much says everything you need to know about how much they care about giving back to their communities or helping those in need. I'll give you a hint. It's the same amount that Musk paid in taxes in 2018. Nothing. Thanks for watching Good Morning Bad News. If you want to see all of our scripts and sources 100% for free, or if you like this channel and want to help support it and get this mug or these stickers as a thank you gift, you can check us out on Patreon. The link's in the bio. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan directed the CIA to fund a rebellion against the elected Nicaraguan government, which the Reagan administration paid for by illegally selling weapons to Iran and facilitating the Colombian cocaine trade. This was known as the Iran-Contra affair, and it was very well documented with plenty of hard evidence. It was a blatant violation of Nicaragua's sovereignty and many treaties that prohibited governments from selling weapons and drugs to other countries. On every level, it was blatantly illegal. So in 1986, the ICJ presided over the case of Nicaragua versus the United States, with 291 judgments against the US. Obviously, after exposing overwhelming evidence, America was found guilty. The ICJ ruled that they had to pay Nicaragua $17 billion in reparations. But of course, they didn't. Instead, the United States withdrew their support of the ICJ's authority. And because the US is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, they vetoed every attempt to enforce the ICJ's judgment on themselves. Literally, they pulled a get-out-of-jail-free card and nothing happened. And just 2 years later, the United States found itself in the International Court of Justice again, when the US Navy shot down an Iranian civilian aircraft flying in Iranian airspace. Killing civilians in their own country is an absolutely clear-cut international violation of law.
Hey, it's part 3 of Communism versus Socialism, and I'm going to explain why we've never had a communist country. If you remember from part 2, the intermediate step between socialism and communism is having a democratically elected government controlling all the means of production. And that's great if the government is working on behalf of the people, but it rarely is. And what almost always happens is that the more power a government is able to control in an effort to achieve socialism, the more likely it is that power-hungry, corrupt officials who are part of the owner class are able to get into office by lying and cheating, and they get their friends into positions of power, and now you don't have a socialist government. But instead you have a kakistocracy, which is a government that's run by the worst, least qualified, and most unscrupulous citizens. And it's important to understand that these countries are no longer socialist or communist, but they're failed states in kakistocracy. But if you look at countries that implement social policies, including the United States, but more easily seen in countries like Sweden and Canada, it's very clear to see that these policies are successful, beneficial to the population, and smaller scale examples of socialism that succeeds in spite of the corrupt owner class. So the real problem with socialism is power-hungry capitalist corruption. Also, America invades every single country that